Hey guys, so as race season is fast approaching, I thought I would put together a little video tackling the big topic of fueling. So there's a few things I believe come under that topic of fueling, and I'm going to run through some of them quickly. And the reason I'm doing this video in particular is just to, I guess, start the conversation and you know, hopefully prompt a few thoughts from those watching and listening to this, because I think it's misunderstood, and there's like a lot of things within triathlon and within our industry, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of people talking about a lot of different concepts, but like always, we can boil all of that down into some really simple takeaway things. And if we can do that, then we've got much more control of it, and we can actually make some effective decisions and effective choices for everyone individually. So as a general rule, most people probably under fuel in training, but then when it comes to racing, it's something that's highly overcomplicated. Then there's the hot topic of fasted training and fat adaptation. And then there's more and more people looking into using real food as a fuel source as opposed to engineered products, and how that fits in the, I guess, on the spectrum of health versus performance. So first things first, fasted training. There's definitely value in doing fasted training. A lot of people do fasted training without even thinking about it being fasted training. And I think as a general rule, if you're performing relatively well, your energy levels are good throughout the day, you're healthy, you're not getting sick, you're holding a healthy weight, then you probably don't need to change too much. But there's definitely value in that, and that's where we cross into that fat adaptation topic that I mentioned earlier. And one way to increase your body's ability to use fat as a fuel source as opposed to carbohydrate as a fuel source is to do some fasted training. Now, there's a lot more to it than that, but to keep it real simple, there is a way to do it. So as a general rule, if a session's depending on your ability and how long you've been in the sport, of course, it always needs to be. All these general guidelines need to be taken as such, and then they need to be manipulated to suit individuals. But on that 60 to 90 minutes or less, and or relatively low intensity, fastest training is going to be safe and effective. If you've got a really short, sharp training session, or you've got a longer training session, that's when you want to start thinking about fueling that session. And again, there's different guidelines. You might have something pre-training session, and that's when we might start to sample things that we might want to ingest prior to racing. So then that ticks off two birds with one stone. You might be thinking about ingesting some sort of fuel during training. And when I say fuel, that may come from real food or from an engineered sports nutrition type product. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But always we want to be making sure that we refuel with a mix of carbohydrate and protein within 30 to 60 minutes immediately following a training session. And I'll qualify that statement because there are some studies that saying that you don't necessarily need to do it within that window. But the reason I do that is because I'm generally speaking to age group triathletes, and I think being planned and organised and having a post training snack ready to go is a really good habit to get into in terms of managing your overall energy, adapting from the training session itself, but more so the flow on for most age group triathletes and what they're doing. If they're training in the morning, for example, they're usually then dealing with kids or getting off to work and so on and so forth. So days are busy basically. So if you're organised, you have something going straight away, even if there's a little while before you then eat breakfast or your next meal of the day, like your actual meal of the day, at least you've had something go in, you've topped yourself back up, and you're starting that recovery process. You've got some protein going in for muscle repair and to start to reduce the levels of cortisol in the body, which is the stress hormone, which we need as a stimulus for our bodies to adapt to post training, but we don't want it hanging around for the rest of the day. And then also some carbohydrate going in to top up the glycogen stores that have been used during the training session. And as I said, it just sets you up into some good habits and for managing your daily energy levels. So when I mentioned pre-training or pre-racing food, I mentioned it could be real food or engineered products. As a general rule in training, unless it's a very highly race-specific session, I would recommend using real food. So I'm talking things like bananas, dates, and that type of thing. There's a carryover effect of sampling different food stuffs prior to a training session, because then you start to understand how your body responds to different foods and how it sits in your belly, and how hard you're able to work after having ingested those types of foods, which has obviously flow-on benefit to knowing what's suitable to ingest on a race morning. But generally speaking, real food, especially if you're at home or it's in a training session where you can carry food in your pockets on the bike, for example, real food is generally going to be the better option. Again, engineered foods have a place, so whether that's 32 GIs, Cliff, it's shots, whatever it may be, they definitely have their place, and generally they have been engineered to be suitable for ingesting during exercise. But where possible, you're going to use real food first. And again, the time where that's not going to be appropriate is if you're doing a race-specific simulation, whether it be bike or run or a brick or a longer session, for example. You don't want to go and try one of these engineered products for the first time on race day. So, once you've dialed it in, you may only do it, a couple of times, couple of sessions during any given prep. But if you've never done it before, there definitely needs to be some sampling of it, and that's just as much about how it sits in your stomach and how you feel after it, whether you like the taste, really simple things like that, as opposed to what it's doing for you at a physiological level. I mentioned at the top of the video, most people underfuel in training. I think that's a fair assumption and generalization, and I think that's because it's not really thought about until we start to get race specific, and then all of a sudden race day, and there's all these different guidelines out there about how much you need and what's a general rule of thumb. And I think the mere fact that so many people get through pretty good training sessions and do big blocks of training and lead into a race with minimal fuel, as much as I don't necessarily recommend that, I think it shows that you can definitely get by with amounts on the lower end of the scale, and at the very least you can sort of train the body to adapt and use the fuel sources it already has on board, and then you view the ingestion of food during training and racing as a top up to those stores. And by that I'm obviously referring to the fasted training and the fat adaptation. So we've all basically got unlimited stores of fat that we can use to provide energy, and we've probably got anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours worth of carbohydrates stored in the liver and the muscles. So we've definitely already got fuel on board, but that doesn't mean we want to always rely on that. Glycogen or carbohydrate is more easily accessed by a body for fuel, but it's much more limited, whereas fat is harder, so that harder for the body to use, because it takes more for the body to break that down into a usable form. But there's basically unlimited stores of that. So that's a whole nother video unto itself, but I'm just trying to provide an overall snapshot. So some practical examples, like if you were going out for a long ride, whether that's 5 hours for some of the Ironman guys or whether it's closer to 3 hours for the Olympic and half Ironman guys, you may incorporate a little bit of column A, B, and C from what I've already discussed. So you might start that fasted. You might roll out of bed, just have some water, put a couple of bananas in your pockets or some dates or whatever you may be using, and you may even bring along one of the engineered bars that I spoke about, especially if you think you may use that in your next race. And you might do the first hour, for example, for a 3-hour ride, you might do the first hour without ingesting anything other than water. And then in the second hour, that's when you might start to eat your real food. And then in the third hour, especially if it's a bit of a stretch for you to go for a 3-hour ride, that's when you might get the engineered products out and use that bar or gels if it's something you like, or a pre-mixed powder sports drink. And the reason for that is as your body fatigues and as you go, further into that ride, you want to be getting the fuel in a little bit more quickly. Now, again, there's different variations for where you are in terms of fasted or being fat adapted, but that is a general rule of thumb. And this video is designed to provoke a little bit of thought into what you're doing, and actually having a little bit, having people think about it before they go out and train. So think about that within the context of your training and what your goals are. Have a think about the types of sessions you're doing. Like if you've had, for example, quite a heavy weekend, an easier day on a Monday, but then you're going to try and do some building efforts or some higher intensity work on a Tuesday, but you're still feeling a little bit fatigued. Not only could you scale the session, but you might think about supplementing it with ingesting some fuel, either pre-session or following. And if we're now at the time in the year where we're starting to do some longer rides, for example, you might initially employ the fasted, real food, and then engineered food model. And then once you go into the race simulation, the high intensity sessions for prolonged periods of time, that's when you might start to sample what you're going to do come race day. So whether that is real food or engineered food, or whether you do decide you want to go down using the body's own fuel sources. And on that note, it's probably not the time of year to do it. It's something that you would start playing around with in post-season and the prep phase. But at this time of year, when you're going to do more race-specific work, that's when you might start actually giving some thought to the fueling and hydration strategy that you want to employ come race day, and starting to sample it. And on that note, it doesn't need to be every single session. You certainly shouldn't be ingesting gels and high sugary drinks in every single training session. 1, it's not healthy for you, it's not good for you. 2, it's not going to help you. 3, it's not necessary. And it's certainly not going to do anything for you using or you're helping your body adapt to using the fuel that it already has available. So a few things to provoke some thought, start a conversation perhaps, and a couple of general rules of thumb. Questions and comments are welcome as always. This is a big topic, so there'll certainly be more on this one. But that's a nice intro and overview of a couple of different things that I think are important from a coaching point of view. Cheers, till next time.